Yeah, tanta kogi dus.
Hello.
Yeah, tanta kogi.
Give me the.
There's a little bit of static though.
Hello.
Katrina can hear you, but she's
Give me the.
Kogi doing
Dạ. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10.
Hello.
Các bạn ở trên mạng có nghe được chưa?
Hello.
Các bạn ở trên online có nghe được không?
Member social nyana hako tumge she tumge shiro yoge landur che tumge chire te wara o tiende de chotro wala telche komba tenji tamje jode be milindi shindune ne niebar shindu kawre sura tenjo de ne niebar shindu kawase maranzo nawase o marte ti jodi tuwe pe kawurwa nige chubungi chudum songore 대가는 집에 땅굴에 서바공굴에 심바바난 심바마다는 롱주기 폰데 쪼부시는데 기우라 심바당굴에 심벨롱주세 팀디테세 지금 미국 주본 게 지금 송아되게 때돌이 기우라 심벨롱주 팀디테세 서변 당대에서 서바공 콘도 잡으잖아 정말 게데 베토메데와 티버란자서 신나 잡던데 기우라 서바 공부하다가 지미다 나도 가고 용게를 통되거든 요한테 서바 연구하라. 이런 준비했을 때 사실 뒤에 단순히 내가 벌신 도가 주기만 무시를 써오라. 대가 산재 때보다 제어라. 산재 때보다 지된 금방 볼이야. 개방만 부차 놈나 때보다 더게요 말이야. 산재 지된 금지 폐에 가보라. 대표님 최소 단다 최대 만우세 지게질 규정 아주 퇴 뒤주시 와라 저 뺏게바 상보령 가라도 그 소토고요 말마도 대전되는 예버신도 가세 야 뒤치 동산다 리도
So, as Shantideva has said, so hard to find the leisure and freedom whereby the aims of beings may be gained. If I now fail to turn it to my profit, how could such a chance be mine again? So, the human life that we have right now, with all of the kind of freedoms and endowments, this is something that is quite rare. We have all of the freedoms. We have been born as a human, and a human with the kind of capabilities to be able to understand what it is we should adopt and what we should abandon. If we were born as, say, an animal, or born without intellectual capabilities, or born in another kind of situation, we wouldn't have that sort of ability. But we don't really have a sense of how precious, of how rare this is. We need so many different causes to get the kind of life that we have right now. Well, not only do we need to guard ethical conduct, as in abandoning the 10 non-virtues, but to have the kind of conducive conditions around us, we need to practice generosity. We need to practice patience. As it is said, that from ethics comes a happy migration, but from generosity comes wealth. If we don't engage in things like generosity, we could be born in a situation where we are completely bereft of anything. We're in total poverty. So we need to practice these other things. We need to practice patience. Patience brings about a pleasant appearance. If we lack patience, we may take rebirth in a form that is very sort of off-putting to everyone that we see, as opposed to something wherein we attract others to us. So we need so many causes and conditions to have this kind of human rebirth with all of the sorts of circumstances to be able to practice the Dharma. And not only that, but we need to have had a Buddha come into the world, which is something extremely rare. And not only that, but the Buddha needs to have taught, and those teachings need to remain. And so, other than our not recognizing it, the situation that we find ourselves in is extremely fortunate to have encountered the Buddha's teachings, to have all of the necessary requisites to be able to practice.
Milita sempre di Shantideva soe tanto so chubina e poi fanno modesto ora ten tanto da chiama ma sono res ma stava chiedendo giusto ci siamo se che omora tanto da vicino coranzo sai se to che stati niente coran passo c'è di sada c'è ne sicura se coti tanto da chiama ma sono res ora ngara so namje sta tinde yobati samlo tanto e tinde yobati tanto da chiama ma sono res Shantideva per Zoya Tondaya, Chendi Tondaya, Zochura, or Tipe Pamburi, then don't do the Kawaki Machores. Don't do a Koratum message, Chedi Abusikigra, Trandinian Jumpu, Buddha, the competition, do show it. Did the Kawamachore, the Pambures and Gora. Oh, Tanjina nearby Shindukas. Till a log was a Chendi Tonda Chipumares, software. Dig it and it till a log with that to you, or the title with the air from Gora. Give you turn to what you all ask. Give a danger to that. Give a bad kill and kill by my book, and then I do your nachi or killing your my name, whatever Kumbuchi to go. Sometimes kill a sample and sometimes gamble and sometimes to visit the Yora. Just kill what and make you a sasha by one. What in the Mount Baliatani, give you to that. Some Yora thing as you double some give you chummy to that, Tambo to yes. Then you bring cigarette, you chambos, and that's some your head. The Tambo the caress, Nason Solo Maji, Father me, Yawa, and a church of the truth to get under the huts. Tanda Baksha showered the artillery and the witcher time, Tindesu, Salia, Jenny Rebellia, Yaya drama, the Tamachu, Shima was some Tavora. I give you to do Tambo the caress, and Yasola Maji. Father me church to be looting Kevin to anything a corner con the Ama the man, Talogen, Nason Drama was his water. Tito had with it. Tito the country to Burusina till the church over there. Church in the Garis, the Garis, Kawata church in God. Shall I tell up, shall I pant over the church in God? Shall I never care? Shall I tell you the my bus? My bus. My body, Yamaya Datan to Kigora. Chudigi, and had a million things looking Cabasset to Gora. Or to the tea, Messinalia, Sendelia, Luma Yusum Yukone, Mikiwa Chusai the Padam, Ka, Kiwachu the Tuber, King eating in the summer down the Chura. Pang said the Tiro, Mikiwa to the Pans of the altering a teacher massum, Tajana Pangora. Tam Magenta, there's an me, Masena. So much in so cheap Tibo Mado, so Japan be pay or Mara. Had a military that do take good service to your mother, or to the Kasura. Oh, Tinity, eating missing, you might read now. Tiring a shellia, never so much as was Luma Yusum con some Taura. Titana, you know, look there. Oh, didn't get the chess or teacher, no, didn't a call contestants, carry caps, Tato chess, teachers, some Tindrimas, some Nanico Gatora, Any new time go to Sare. The man does you shall not go to say, go to say, Chato, Chato, Shero, Kizzy, Kizzy, the Chana, Ranjari, Canelation, Mado, Tandanya, Mara, or the give it on that, and would have the church, yes, a church, Kawachamahala, me, Kovaya, which Toku Yena, Miguel Chudipa, Kawachu de Tugure, nearing it imaginal. She's one of the kind of education reduce younger. Meanwhile, she's one of the Miguel Chudiongo. The dudes at the my own chain, the channel, and the out to go. But the task is a chibutation. So at the moment, they began to do some generation, character much older. Some of the time they had this lobster and teaching it in the show, some Congoda. Come then, person to do that, Kajish, I let them make the choose or she did live so. Or the go down with the church thing as I was that's who matters and much how could the tonage of my shot. The church with on time matter. Captain says that the church and the girls choose a Yankee, so I'm on the community degree, so I give it to. So I'm on the Kawood again, Kawan in the sun and I'm on the young shows. Sunday the changes symbol to Yaman Javanation night in the young shows, so I'm on the Kawura. In a Koshi man, and so Malam Kemi or a messenger soda. Near Kanga to me point at a Kawato chung around Yamson, your ship at the candle share the ass. Nail and get the share the ass. Share the current to share with the das of the Tishin button by the kitchen of the charcoal sauce. Sure, down with the lower carriage chowder. Nearing getting better down like this. Sawapang said, Sawadi young girl, that's Sawadi. 차와치는 매일 내버려 동해 연구를 해서 그래. 대자와 천주질 시속 그래. 펜타고를 해서 매일 펜타는 펜타고를 대화도 전제된 거를 잠바된 거라. 매일 펜타 나고 가보 연구를 대화 연구를 강에서 있는 것을 잠바 연구다. 잠바다 자와 천주질 시속에 내 자와 방보다 개와 두고된 거라. 어쩌다티 가수다. 대천보래 대간저 천주세기와 말에 teacher 겨 통마다만에 사셔베 미기와 주망부제를 수수하고 마도 되고 간데 근데요에다 던들게지게 되고 배 참심부사요 그래서 대충 만들어버려 삼샷바쳐라 예심제 샷바쳐니 차체 주바표에다 겨와 두베다 덤반데한테 가르쳐내 꼬라케에다 강가쳐니 되고 다야 된다 티치네 되고도 다도라 되고 제부도 매매 차그래 되고 거기 내지 요새라 뭐다만 도시라 어진기라 하마고요. 디벌이 대지에서 대가래서는 고샤나 다야요래. 디만송섬 아래 미질도 두부지에 단디버서 건데 결한단디 위치에서 전부 차야도 와. 디네 디버들 열심제네. 미시베 몽베 왕게 컨트롤 왕게 타도 왕게 라메 바티 버셔요. 대상 만디오래서 샤바지나 다야요래 저래. 딜레 빼샤래. 짜다버지 춘중시나 디버디 짜나시 제사제 다가샤샤나 짜나시 춘중시 되어라. 코치나를 카드샤나 베마도샤를 춘중까지는 만도샤를 홀템도 우리서 녀선도샤를. 다 짜데 콜레레서네 첨부서나 짜 고란지부에 대상가도 뒤가서 전화를 추주도 쉬어도 하다 가져가지 요래. 짜데 레레서사레 마도 대샤시 춘중시 샤네 마템도라. 어디나시 디바들 샤바체나 코 양부체제 마음 로메도네 손 로메도 샤요라 어디페샤네 송구도 디송다 어디 송나야 모도시.
So here, the situation that we are in is extremely fortunate. And as this verse says, we can achieve the aims of beings. But here, if we are just using our life to sort of sustain ourselves, that all of our efforts are for this life alone, that would really be quite a great loss. I mean, there would be no difference from us and animals. Animals are able to find the food that they need. They're able to like help their friends, destroy their enemies, get what they need to survive, raise their young, and so forth. But we need to think beyond that. We have a kind of capacity that is, we can think beyond just this life. We shouldn't just sort of be thinking about the affairs of this life alone, but rather recognizing that we have to take life after life. There are past and future lives. And although we cast off the aggregates from this life, we are going to go up and down and throughout samsara based upon the kind of actions that we have created. And so here where it says that so hard to find this kind of leisure and opportunity whereby the aims of beings may be gained, there are three sorts of levels of that. There is that of the small capacity or scope, that of the middling scope, and that of the great scope. And at the lowest level, although we shouldn't look down upon this kind of dharma, is ensuring that we have a good rebirth as a human or a god in the future. All of the kind of study that we have done, the imprints of dharma that we have put down, we want to be able to increase and develop those further in our future lives. And so we want to avoid being born in the lower realms. This is really the first sort of aim or meaning. We do dharma in the sense that dharma is virtue, is positive actions, is really taking to heart, abandoning harm, and doing things to benefit others. So here we see that, well, non-dharma, when I cause harm, when I do things that inflict pain upon others, I'm going to lead to a rebirth in the lower realm. And so by way of my body, speech, and mind, I am going to eliminate all of those kinds of harmful or negative actions. And this is something where we need to be like decisive about it, resolute. It's not enough to just sort of accidentally avoid killing. Like animals go out and they might not kill during the course of the day, but we only get the benefit of that virtue if we've actually made a pledge at the beginning of each day to say, you know, I'm not going to cause harm to other sentient beings. This is based upon seeing the faults of those actions. Like when we see, oh, I got angry and this caused this kind of destruction, we see the faults of that. That is how we begin to reduce our anger and eventually get rid of it. But if we don't think about it, we can say all kinds of prayers, we can sit on our cushions and do these practices like saying prayers, but we're not actually putting the Dharma into practice. If we keep, when we get up off our cushion and go into society, acting in the way that we always have, like lying to others, cheating them, stealing from them, and so forth. So here it is based upon really meditating on these things, thinking about them, that we then know that they are wrong. We see the faults of that. And this is a kind of situation where normally we know that these things are wrong, but unless we are paying attention, like we often have this thought of like, oh, I'm going to make prayers to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and these holy beings, and they will sort of protect me or save me. I will just make prayers to them. Well, we have to do our own practice. As the Buddha said, you have to be your own savior. You have to be your own protector. I am the one who teaches you, but you have to do it for yourself. And so we need to hold that in mind. When we do harm to others, we see the kind of hurt that that inflicts. We don't like that. We want to avoid that, recognizing how it would be in relation to ourselves. And so too, we try to benefit others. We see the benefits of creating positive relations through love and compassion. And so this is really the foundation of all Dharma, doing this avoidance of non-virtuous actions and trying to engage in virtue. And we shouldn't look down upon that. We shouldn't see that as small, but we really when we do these kinds of practices like that are positive actions, like say saying prayers or doing offerings or prostrations or circumambulations, we can make them more powerful by our motivation, by the kind of action, by the kind of intention that we have behind them. So in addition to doing positive actions, purifying our negativities, recognizing those kinds of harmful things that we have done in countless previous lives, and saying that, you know, I regret this. I am not going to engage in this in the future. I'm going to make an effort in order to purify and confess these negativities. Well, it is said that non-virtue has one quality, and that is that it is able to be purified. We can actually eliminate the kind of negative effect of that. Like if we think about a piece of metal, if you put a piece of metal in a ball and you drop it into the ocean, well, it's going to sink right to the bottom. But if you have flattened that out, I mean, look at the kind of boats that we have that travel on the ocean. They are huge and they are made of metal, but they don't sink because they are sort of flattened out. And so too, those negativities that would drag us down, we have the power through confession, through purification, to sort of make them light, make them flat in that way that metal can float when it is made flat on water. So here, the being of small capacity really practices in a way that they are eliminating non-virtues and engaging in virtues on a daily basis. And this is something we shouldn't see as being small, but rather we should see this as the foundation of all of the rest of the practice that will come, because this ensures that we have a good rebirth in the future to continue to foster those imprints that we have made in this life.
Làm ác để tổn hại cho chúng sinh. Cho nên trước tiên thì điều quan trọng là chúng ta phải bỏ 10 cái điều ác. Muốn bỏ 10 điều ác thì chúng ta phải sám hối những cái tội mà trước đây trong quá khứ chúng ta không có điều ác nào mà chưa từng làm. Cho nên chúng ta phải sám hối bằng cách là sám hối, lạy Phật, tụng kinh, niệm chú trong ông, vân vân. Tất cả các điều đó để giúp cho chúng ta ngăn chặn những tội lỗi. Tại vì tội lỗi nó có một ưu điểm đó là khi sám hối thì nó sẽ tự tiêu diệt. Cho nên từ xưa tới giờ do vô minh si mê, cho nên con không biết đã tạo ra biết bao nhiêu tội lỗi. Nên ngày nay thật lòng con xin sám hối. Cũng như vậy, mình có lỗi lầm với ai đó thì mình xin lỗi thì người đó cũng sẽ tha thứ cho mình. Cũng như vậy, những tội lỗi giống như là những cái hòn sắt, nếu chúng ta để nguyên, chúng ta không có làm gì khác thì nó sẽ bị chìm đi. Nó chìm đi có nghĩa là những cái tội lỗi đó nó sẽ dẫn chúng ta vào địa ngục ngạ quỷ súc sinh. Nó thuộc loại nặng, nó sẽ chìm xuống. Nếu chúng ta tìm cách để sám hối là mình làm dẹp và làm mỏng đi cái miếng sắt đó để cho miếng sắt đó sẽ nhẹ hơn, và làm thế nào để tiêu hủy nó đi để không đọa vào những cảnh giới thấp. Đó là bằng cách là sám hối, tụng kinh, làm các điều lành.
이거 다 들렸다지야. 걔가 전에 뭔데 주주 성도. 단단한 좀 내비와 주가 걔가 주주에도 주로와. 다 들렸다지야. 가서 걔가 전에나 뭔데 주주 성도. 우마른 제초와다 안도다 주급이야. 주주도 성도네 감소 성감다 성매도 정말 걔 주디 성도하다. 단단한 좀 뭔데 예수님 믿겨가 오늘도 하다 밀게 주디 간자시 성도하다. 다 들려장 성감 성미세 때에 단다요라 달하게. 대소대체 소다. 주주도 대강 주는 매자오라. 주양양 이제 대가르스네. 숨디들이 가서 창매 통다. 창디지 저기가래. 창매 통다. 창디 남부전에 그 창디 자 시버자 동매자스로 그 통나 근데 전부 요구하라. 지단 것들이 레디 녀버차야 수도 레사에 굴르고 와라. 수수 레드 하시면 라와나 맞지고 와라. 심디 남긴내시 대고 말에 레디 남긴내시 라와에 좀 마시고 와라. 대고 말에 대신 라와나 맞지고 와라. 심디 버르부다시 뭐 마부통나네 라시네 녀탈롱고 가는 거라. 녀벌에 창통한테 도와줘라. 녀벌 지시해놓고 바로 시에 직제를 줘라. 창통한테 들으시라 그 말에 들려도라. 자꾸 루다 좀 라마 받지. 그래서 맨인데 사이도 와서 창가 보러 또서 그 양아래서 좀이 그 지금도 아마도 셰컵 접시 semying드랜드 담은데 요라 저기 담은데 쳐와라. 자 창매 도와도 지리 창통나 nhota mambo soso nhota kitchen drama she kyawde kyaw samsang lo soso shide do la da to ni chato ene chana gon do sha do ko hama gon do sha chilone ene kane langa ka do shide 진짜 mambo yo ga je tong de ya da chang me do de chi de choa sa se me se ge de choa de 먼저 내가를 저라 추다 잡을래 때도 잡고 갈라사에 가가 매매도 요 말았대요. 탑시적으로 될라 추덕식다. 촤 메시제 탑시 가시게 멤버지를 가시게 내 가서래 소바 가시게 아니 개개지를 다 소소서 가시 장마수야 지그래 가시 부 따야 지그래 가시 경고 따야 지그래 가시 캄보자 그래 가시 심거 따그라 어디를 수답시고 와라 소화상시 되게 전부다 메시케게 탑시 제 대처수 교답시고 와라 나라도 대처에 메트로 단디 말아다 디펜더 두고 와라 미션다는 펜베턴데 지소를 거야지 지금 말마다 지소를 메고야지 내가 저러지서 라테 지금 말아 라테에 게 말아 라테에 다 정신에서 삼고다 디 말아 라테에 그 추더라고 그 내가 전에 갈아서 그래서 속으로 와 되던다래 아마도 딩아주데 개와 많이 뭐 줄이겠지 말아 두는데 베케이션 보래 샤르기 펜베 두고 와라디 지소를 거고 간 거는 장마son 게지나 장마son 람가선에 가지 펜데 와라서 장마 니께 람게리지나 부처주 게 람도 카트라신게 미치조나 로통게 내주 하공게 자고라 김멜럽주 샤선에 꾸바꾸다 되라 계좌 하고 가게 하고 되라 특별로 펜기와 되리 어떻게 샤를 기간질 레벨이나다 불단게 나다 가봐 삼번함다서 지조를 펜기를 해서 가라 지조를 펜벨레가 지에서 삼번 삼부치 시세나 야다가 소화서 그랬더라 다티 멤버체 lumbetum dangawa chedwa sonjangere jine sonjapchora chida sonjapchosara kesasa sonjadi yabu desigar chida chalam bese de nyo chuke kala yesede pajoke yama chemilko kandora tane ko kesasa ya chochora tisawrmado tele heke yata gogotani pa chayetende na ya ma chayorwa chayata jeer tender ma vishe cha yuju chen de yomaro Shantideva Treta Sangasir Tapele and Dwayne Yaka or Tasha Chichera said the milk convener. Near Chalani Alheti Agora, Tiputa Winchation Dash Station among the Saro. No lumbo tema ever that shot them better. In the court Chawachi and Sudapchigana Matera. Relusa of Titania Tocciana, Tibuchara, Sudabianta Kachamara. What did so that the Sambuchi Church number towers, lots of my English. Hasan Nambach and what teacher Jurachen, social legacy, Messacuran legacy at the church Kurtora, Iriniculo Samutangura, or net to the lega which is some legacies at the cover of Gustav Suso Kiwai Sabrina, Tipe Audetua. Tito Dal Kurutan and the church to that she saw that on my daughter. And also the day the summer Tangan so the summer cool Batimara. Changes some sort of Sodic Balopse. Sota Dam and social machine. The social carriers in the Chizogan go out to this. Man doesn't like with us, still I'm not still mind the short up to them. Say, so put on the sort of grace, a tit on the loss of the door. A gay in a Tarwa, Mumba, Talamogumara, Kazisha, the Chizona, Tandunashi Chalmara. Share your passion. Take a drinking the moment to share Sunday Chumden, some Tandangazuma, shares a chair as a door. Take the man of Mara, which is a terrible of some door. Then it can see well of tea to send some tower. Or shares some of the bear some your Maras and Gora. That's a thing when they go and the car, and the car does. So Tajish was Gora. The man and them does a mere carson at tea, but something to you, Mara. Setting the law, and in under the water was also some duet and I'll teach you so that. That is a lobster. Donald Mamu, oh, kid. Not to Tamu, the social Pamata, Kushep, Poo, producer, Sazayana, Tubuche, Chabuche, Chamba, the Selecone, Kangur Suda. Namgina Lunta, they were Padamara, and was a Puda Chumachis and the Mituba lemons and then Chovitashisos. The Chovitashi Tambu to now let's order. Chamba that's all come set and 9 million go together. Down them come this or something, watch a machine get to them do some tower. Kashi Moji Shinduma, Kashi Yabuchi, Kashi Tubuchi, Guayama, Tilela Doa. Chamba that's all to the sources, Tambu, 9 million come the Comera. 9 million come any Yandene come any number of Chopa Karina, Chopa, and the Misolagum. Nothing about Tombet Kimchi to the Lacum. Perusia, some Jay in the Assembly, Tawad to remember some Jay in the Assembly. This soon I carry something. She didn't come to say the Ogara.
So, sometimes Geshe-la says a little bit much, but so here, in addition to abandoning the 10 non-virtues, often we talk about the 16 virtue or 16 sort of practices for ensuring a good rebirth. These are described in the Precious Garland, as well as in various sutras. So here, this is talking about the kind of necessities to ensure. I mean, we are looking primarily to gain a good rebirth as a human or a god, and this also gets into how one goes about achieving a birth in the form and formless realms, or the material and immaterial realms. So here, the first of those additional 6 that are added on is to not take intoxicants. So here, taking something like alcohol drinking is something that is very dangerous. I mean, you lose control over your mind and your body. You lose that autonomy. By getting drunk, you're really not in control anymore over what you do. Like someone who is crazy, you might be able to reason, you might be able to get them calm or something, but someone who is intoxicated really is not able to be reasoned with in any sort of way. And so using intoxicants, it doesn't need to only be alcohol. We see things there now that people take some kind of medicines, or they take various shots or something to sort of zone out, just become kind of numb to the world, one could even say. And so, I mean, using intoxicants is something that is very dangerous. I saw some people in Ladakh, for example, a guy who got drunk and he went outside in the cold and died of cold along the road. He just fell asleep drunk. So we can see that intoxicants and taking intoxicants are something that really takes our mind out of a controlled kind of place. It doesn't allow us to use it in a good way. And then there is the next, which is right livelihood, having a good means of supporting ourselves. So it's not as though in this world we are able to just get things spontaneously without any sort of effort, but rather we need to provide for the needs of society. And there are many different kinds of work that are necessary to do that. I mean, we have people that build houses, we have people that clean things, we have people that build roads, we have teachers, we have doctors, and all of those fulfill a role in society. They meet the various needs that we have. And so good livelihood is really about creating a benefit for others. Like we're not, if we can if we can make the right intention, we're not just going to work to get our wages, to be able to buy our food, but we can see that we do something that is of benefit to others, whether it is cleaning, whether it is watching children, whether it is being an educator or a doctor. If we recognize that this is something that is beneficial to society and make a kind of effort to set our motivation, thinking I'm doing something that is virtuous, in this way, our entire life, really, the livelihood that we are carrying out can become something that is constantly virtuous. So, I mean, even if we do something like business, I mean, we need to engage in commerce to be able to get the various things that we need. And there are those who maybe are solely focused on their profit. And so they're willing to, like, you know, tweak the scale a little bit to get a little bit more for themselves. Now, that's obviously not engaging in right livelihood. If we're cheating others, if we're not paying our taxes, if we're trying to get around various things, that doesn't become meaningful. But really, when we engage in even business, even these other types of works that provide for the needs of society, that's really how our entire life can be, our daily life can become virtue, can become meaningful. If we think that Dharma is really just about sitting on a cushion and thinking, we're kind of missing the point. The Buddha has taught in the sutras the importance of learning the various sciences. We need things like medicine. I mean, people get sick, they have danger to their life. We need someone who is able to eliminate that. We need the various crafts. We need people who build roads and houses. We need people who teach language. I mean, if we didn't have people who knew the science of language and so forth, we would have kids that wouldn't be able to speak properly. We wouldn't be able to understand. We need those kinds of skills. Things like logic and reasoning, to give that to others, the ability to be able to actually understand the kind of logical connections between things and use your own mind. mind in that way is something that is really important as well. So we see the various sciences, including the inner sciences of working with our own mind, trying to eliminate our afflictions and so forth, as taught in the sutras. And so we shouldn't disregard this as thinking that it's not somehow real Dharma practice or it's not important. It really begins with our interactions with those around us. As a verse expresses, showing respect and love for one's parents is really the first auspiciousness. We begin by showing respect to those around us and expand that out more and more and more.
남의 최소도 령하기 권에 무엇을 채워줘야 되래. 이기 권에 그 납심 줘야 돼. 그 사방 멤버스 모두 봐줘야 내고 말와. 걔네로 말아. 다 리당하고 권에 써야 돼. 그 무엇을 내고 와. 반대로 무엇을 내고 합니다. 저 남의 최다서 령하기 권에 무엇을 내버려 빠고래 제라. 디체. 조금 조사. 어디간들이야. 숨 랑자를 쳐 숨세. 주바셔를 쳐 숨세. 다 단도 다들 강고 방자로 봐. 더 시스템 미팅 줘도 랑고라. 다 가서라. 주바셔를 쳐 숨세래. 대가래서는 가서라. 다들 되려라. 그 지인다 단뜻이 말해. 가서라. 어레 그 지인다. 그배 구십다 집에 거네 침바다에서 봐. 침바다 요라마지. 침바들 소명부가 선생지 침바시데 사회 통해다 초학을 오버쳐야 되라. 선생님. 최지 침바시도 납작값이 써야 되라. 납작해야 돼. 최지 침바시라. 대콜로 좀 되기와라. 기계주 뒤자리나 지다 납기와라. 대치기 완티지스도 뒤침바 챙기와라. 최지 침바시 납작해야 가능하라. 근데 민지배치 마셔라. 민지배치 마시면 뭘 까요 여버리시나. 고다다도 시로 여버리시다. 땅에 내면 좀 무기시도 지기나. 던도도 지나 고도발랑가 하도 마시 시시도 추기도 지기나. 내가 전부를 줘라. 뒤지마들 때 탑시치는 민지배치 마셔라. 내가 믿게를 소원을 까내시다. 그래서 정말 집으로 와. 암지도 좀 내한테 소치기 와라. 소모 까내려부터 바시리 와라. 대수 상마 집에 간거래. 어디서 최시에 집에 나다 벤조로 같이 나다. 뒷면배는 강에 대줄에 겹쳐 로바치 내는데 그 시험단전이 제고를 해서라. 그 신에서도 나도 하다 그 지만에 마요 아세를 들으려고 밀로로고를 또 세나 다버리지 못한 마요 아세 가서 펴두라 지카 로바치에서 자주 쓰는 로바치를 생각을 했으나 야도다 란게도 코알에 탈벌에 라고 때와요 그랬어라. 코알에 짜니 기치치 먹고 자서나 예라서 배타르베도 와토서서 다이네 드스 삼기라 티 자주 선배가 신다지 지 로봇이다서 테스나 데라하고 대와요 그랬어라. 나 그거 청소 삼제 까다치 와라. 자 티선다 가서래. 그 시험을 꺼내서 와라. 퍼져들 통주제 라버지 때나 라버 예방도 그 시험도지 야서 라버 예방도 되시네. 막고 지라. 다음에 출신에 있는 퍼즐도 구십도 지어야 되죠. 암지 있는 가게 납다도 저기 퍼즐도 로봇이 올때 구십도 지어라. 그 신당하시기도 어디 지우지래. 그러니까 그 신당 최초세. 연대적입니다. 개화야부터 게다 지도를 로봇에게다 미션도 좀 내가 야부적에도 돌려 구십 지어서 또또 도서거라. 최초다 가서래. 그 시에다 최바로 외배 간사 이거도 좀 어디서 저기 캠보다 로베다 최신게다 팀에게 파마다 야 연내전지 가서 지속 실지하고 싶게도 들라 야 뒤쳐봐라 그 시에다 최초가 최바표 그러죠 최바표서 예바도 그러시래 최바서에 자가를 더다요래 자가는 부자식이라 부자식으로 했으되 파마는 부자식으로 파담 마다비다게 부족하면서 있을 야보는 가지 데려라서 파마를 쳐봐표 그러시네 베베나리네 괜찮고 있기래 내가 두고 있어라 최백개도 투녀라더라 퍼즐들 배도나 까부가 있어서 퍼즐들 투녀로 치고 그러시라 산지에게 송부터 심지어나라 내가 초대 나를 놓쳐야지 심지어나라 패배 초대 나를 쳐줘야지 심지어나라 팬더 저기 가리는 등하 최배 초도 주거든 예소라 가셔 심장을 내가 저 낭만 쳤다 뜨는 하려 겹 쳐서 부셔지게 뒤 가르쳐는 집에 알아서 거다 가시 심장 내지 되는 딸을 지될 거였어 상계의 심장이 되는지 깨라만 못 갈래 단다 팀마도 뒤처럼 상계 단다 팀마도 공부해 말아 뒤에 때는 고랑 공부하는 시제 심장을 쳐와봐서 뒤처는 돌리기로 마도 심장을 쳐와봐 상계를 구셔줘야 돼 도저래 가르쳐 구셔줘야 상계 접수시가 토마스 투기 담보내서 깨라만 못 갈래 심장이 되는 단다 심장마도 공부해 말아 답을 시행해 봐라 소설의 생각이잖아. 틀린 내것이네. 그 야부레스네. 가르쳐 야부레스라. 어디에 가서라. 어디 숨돼서 와서 최다 그 진단 최다 잠서대 잠바체미 인지체미 가와체미 땅염체미서 시그래. 심지어 탐제 대화도 대외 교단데 뭐 주시기도 뒤 잠바체미로 대부초 나와서 가부초 나와서라 동해다 동해 교단 저 주시 인지체미서라 동해 내려 대화담에 저 주시수도 가와체미서라 고강에 내려서 야부도나 소소 가와 공부하라 나라도는 차도 제냐고요라 미질리 아버지도 소소 야구면은 차도 지대라 차도 지어요 말해 대신 지어요 말해 가수래 제수 일할 전에 뒤로 그 야부시다지 어디가 나의 텐데 좀 야부도 나의 텐데 제도 제버르서네 뒤로라 그단 제도 지어서 코디에 아니 차도요 거라 그매나 야부도 생각 전장이 야부도 사용 거라 제수 일할 전에 그 야부치도 나의 야부치 야부도 삼나 야부리도 어디서다 가수래 사무 단조를 빼켜라 누라 쳐셔야 돼 그딴 데만 숨디 데서서 그 진다서 최다 잠바데스 산남주 쳐셔도 삼신한테 그도 때도 간가 쳐라 쳐셔야라 도셔 도셔 상마 쳐라 심지어 야와저도 나와 제수랑 제대가 고소부터 내가 야부도 산남미 야부도 다시 따야 삼 깎고 서서 겨사기라 동해진도 나가 가다서 스스로 제대로 맨날 걸어봐 챙겨 주나 삼네 동해진도 좋아도 이리 제약해요 말씀제 강같이 버리 대화들 동해 맨도 셔셔를 가셔를 가봉아 줄롱바 콘줄롱바 샤초로 쫓는 제제 남바 치게 같이 치게 야오 말을 상구나 따님 재미시기도 아까가 여기에 뒤치는 로셔트에서 간가 제수이란 전화 최시장에 섬신에 최자 최대 마가주 심지어 취소나 때도 말래 거라 최등원에 돼 기성도 알아서 자주 있잖아 심지어 한주도 직발을 가신 한주를 누구를 거기서 개친구 말해 연대예배도 개친구를 해서 그래 연대예배 상대에 가서 납전나야 돼 개친구라 지난뒤에 네 말줘서야 돼 뒤잖아 개친구라 또 제일 오늘 와다문에 제일 가서 취소나 때도 제거라 심지어냐 만주 심지어 콘서트 교보를 대도를 뉴제주에서 통중지라 뒤치에 막 그래도 고아로 고대 말아도 된다를 가셔가지고 누가를 가셔도 가지고 야하라 이내 말아서 콘서트 파트에 가지고 야라도 콘서트를 연구하라 망쳐야 돼 기부 중후에나 다오래도 심지어를 참아봐서 평범도시다 기부 대회는 차당봐서도 심지어를 일인 차당봐서도 기부 신부에는 심지어에 따라서 신해지는 신해지어버지시기도 지소 그런 말도 뜨거워서 요 말을 최근에도 산재의 신다 심지어의 신수도 띵한주 상도만 되게 그 저에서 오늘 지는 저 지도나 때도 연구하라 조사도 오늘 들려보라 뒤중에는 신의 아주 빼져내고도 다음에 심지어 탐자를 신노블에 하고 세대 신노블에 그 말에서 심지어도 빼야버려서 다 수술 lep침부터 해서요라 따당한 통다 가루를 깨지셔야 나쳤네 아주 lep침부 특별 신부쇼 가게 되는 지연도 삼루단다 어디가 주섬 샤고요 야 뒤스론다 다 또서 만다서
So here, when it comes to these additional six qualities that are for gaining good rebirth, here, when we do the kind of mental non-virtues, we have these 10 non-virtues, and the last three of those are mental, right? So we're not actually harming anyone with those directly, although we are creating that kind of harmful mind. But there are those actions that are harmful outside of killing and stealing and sexual misconduct. And those are what are to be abandoned in the third of these six, which is to do no harm to sentient beings, do no kind of violent or harmful, hurtful actions, even beyond what might be listed in the 10 non-virtues. And then it says that we should also engage in generosity, being respectfully generous. So generosity can take many different forms. We can be materially generous. We can give money or other possessions. We can give the Dharma in the sense of giving advice to others, what they should and shouldn't do. We can give protection from fear. When someone is experiencing some kind of difficulty or is in trouble, we can help them to alleviate their fear, whether that is through material means or through advice or through whatever kind of help it might be. And so here, when it comes to generosity, we should engage in this in a way where, again, it is respectful. We have a respect for those that we are giving to. And this is something that a bodhisattva really cultivates. It's said that when someone comes to a bodhisattva asking for help, they actually experience a greater level of joy than a hearer or a solitary realizer experiences upon gaining liberation. The kind of joy that they feel in being able to be of benefit to another sentient being is something almost unimaginable for us. And so we should engage in generosity with that kind of joy, with that kind of respect. I mean, there are certain cultural things like in India, for example, you want to give with your right hand, not your left. You want to give help to people in a way that is not sort of demeaning to them, disregarding them. You should do so in a way where it isn't, kind of looking down like, oh, you're not really worth this, but okay, here, take this, go away. I don't want to give you any more. We want to have the kind of generosity that is done in a way where we actually have a respect for the recipient. And then there is offering to those who are worthy of offering. So this might be those who are ordained, our teachers, those who have qualities in that way. But actually, the first sort of object of offering who is worthy of our offering is our parents. There are those as well who are serving society. They too are worthy of offerings. So here, like it might sort of sound strange to make offerings to one's parents or that they are worthy of offering. But really, this is the kind of generosity that we should engage in, this type of offering, recognizing their kindness. And so here, to please other sentient beings, to work for their benefit through generosity or otherwise, is actually the best way to please the Buddha. The Buddha has said that like to go about doing harm to sentient beings and then turn and say, oh yes, I go for refuge to the Buddha, how could you possibly please him doing that? The Buddha has spent, first gave rise to bodhicitta and spent 3 countless eons developing, accumulating the merit to become a fully enlightened Buddha for the purpose of working for sentient beings. So here, if we then turn around and cause harm to those that the Buddha cherishes, how could we possibly be pleasing them? How could we possibly be doing something that they would support? And so here, when it comes to this making offerings to those worthy of offering, we should also recognize that all sentient beings, whatever sort of status they are in, are worthy of our love, are worthy of our generosity. So here, the next of these 6 qualities. So we're on just finished the 5th, and now the 6th is love, which really encompasses all of the 4 immeasurables. That kind of sense of may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the kind of happiness that is free from suffering. Really cultivating these things like joy. I mean, often when others have something that is good, there is a danger of us feeling jealous, like, oh, why do they have that? Why don't I have that instead? And instead, if we are able to feel joy in that, like, wow, they have something so good. How wonderful it would be if I too could have that, or I would like to be that. I respect that they have that. So this is something that we should try to cultivate within our mind, again, as one of the qualities for gaining a good rebirth, as well as thinking about equanimity. When we are normally in our mind we might think like, well, our country, my family, my city, my, instead of doing that, to view all with impartiality, to really view all as equal and equally of wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer. This is something that is an incredibly important kind of foundation for everything else. So here, when it comes to our way of thinking, we could be engaging in the same action, but our way of thinking creates a huge difference. If we know how to do it, everything can become Dharma. Our very life can become Dharma in that when we try to help others, we do so in a respectful way. When we look at the work that we do, we think about, oh, how may this be of benefit to others and so forth. And so if we work to develop these qualities within ourselves and then apply them in the way that we go out into the world, really, that's the practice of Dharma, because real Dharma comes in society. Like when we are looking around us, there are beings that are in better situations than we are, and there are those that have more suffering than we have. And really, whether we are giving advice or giving material help, we shouldn't look down upon anybody. We should recognize that we all sort of move throughout samsara, going up and down. Some have better circumstances right now, some have worse circumstances right now. But the essence of this is to see all sentient beings in the way that a Buddha would, as being worthy of having happiness and being free of suffering, and thereby abandon harming them. So at the lowest level, we abandon harming others and we try to engage in benefit to them. At the middling level, we look at it and we see, well, attachment and aversion are really the source of all of my troubles and the ignorance that those come from. I'm going to try to get rid of all of that. And we try to eliminate our afflictions entirely to gain liberation. At the level of the great scope, one thinks not only of the faults of attachment and hatred, but really the faults of self-cherishing, this kind of self-cherishing attitude that has led us to continue to cycle within samsara. And so here, there are really sort of two fields we can think about. There are the Buddhas and then there are sentient beings. And the kind of attitude that is cultivated in the Mahayana is one in which, as it is said in the 8 verses of mind training, that may I always view sentient beings as superior to a wish-fulfilling jewel, to really approach them with that kind of reverence.
Tiki Sanji Chu de conditions, Joe Mambola Pembata, Joe Mambola de Church on Chera. Sanji Chu de Sanji Tembate, Pendi Junior Soda, Pembata Dewas. Dewas were the children, she said, so the Chindili Kiba, Chindile, Soso Kiba, Naomi Kiba, Chiso Dewa, she did not have a younger, Chindile Tigi younger. Children, she summoned under Miguel to the park, to the church to the summer. Tina she came in the Corinthian Mata Coca, young mother. Color change to the Sorachira, Soto Chira. What did you call soda? Oh, Mega Tembas, Dawes, the Sindili Quarter, shoot it. Sindili Chizo Tawachimura. Should the share of the nation Chena, Sindili Soso, Dawari, Kibare, Samlo Kondo, Yatado Chodura. Shall know the children shall pass him, but never much at the Shanta Chizo Kanga, the Tumburangura, Kanga Kavachira, Social never changing Yungura. The Chitan called to make what I gave the children, Kanga Yungura, to sort of a sort. The call gave a ticket, can't do awesome. Mamba, the watching of the Russia, or Kanga Mel Children, Chitamadition, dread the Kanga never there. December, your mother. Tandana Mamba sometimes Chendili Yamadi, and would care, you would share, you would attack the way with Madio. Tis a Solachewara. To me, down lady service, those coming in all the call course I am good, somebody make a taxi or my team and a Tarbato, some Gora. What did they go Chendilla, so to miss you or my children. Chendilla so simple Kuyambo, Gachimbo, and you miss the Tendoa. Tendon did the year, but Jotter, around some Tanda Madrin and some great time to Miguel Sociara. Social Megibus, Men Megibus, Chisel, Gerard, Zamburu Conam Miguel Sociara. Take cards out of it. Rohan, the Church had the watch in the which having church event. Sunam de me Sambanam Gadus. Sunam Kivele to the Savian, so some did real, Sunam Tashabuza, Tiagia, some do real Pengiora. What is she doing at the Kimuchumi Chude? Chutamuchi, the Machine Medoa, Shamdo, Lelodua. Social lava, so is the Redoa, Kirachima Kavan, the social lava, Sumdoa. Sanjay Sunda, Tangi Daga going this, Kiran, Google Kiranchi, the Das. Shanda, the Chotan, take the love to Mado, Shanda, Temple, Marudas. So Cabuara, Chudri Cabudua, Chudri Camusidua, Captain Mabo Sanjay, Sanjay Captain, the Mado, Love Jack Omara. Chudri Camuderata, Chudri, Jevene, Kumana, Big Chuban, Kirachu to Nation, or that way. That thing necessarily make it a lot of milky, in Beretta, Cusadua. Nicatamano and a Sabal and Gavacha Shapachena, a social message, the social Kirachima, the so to it. Or the Tidimusha. That keep on doing the share Bangosha, keep on doing the council, keep it to do to what you were last Tandanilati, Tabato, Quakora, Mida Kawakina, Yagachi Medusam. Social Rama, the Pundum, the Leche, what the talk, Tilatom Baneto, Mo Condo Tanga, get on Trato, than nursing the Yamoka Panguda. Yamopana, Yamona, Tangudu, and Zid Panguda. Ah, some iron bush. Switch them the data you can show them as a summer tindua. And then I do so the catching with a show shadow. The catching with the social nurse at the Chabal such a no control your own body. Control my dear child on dressing color body. Mazindi is a chapadi more than I don't like. Tell it and any taunting garage. It's already Tamzindi now, some to shit out when you should have some with them Motuna. Or now something like that, but Kobe kid was in my year, there was the summer Kobe and then made awesome. Pumunga Lieutenant Patasha and Andro, not there, Kishaya, but she was in us as to such a grant in Medora Sambura. Good thoughts make it wa. That social sobul loss, not say Medora, some social sobul manners, Miri Marwa. Social Mirwa. Social sobul at all with her. So with the Pasha and social law, I didn't know when they get him with her. Then there was some down to now. All that thing, but I give it some because simply Tamji, Tendo. Sanjay Komata, Tagashin was there. More than Lucasura. The Gila to the Punk, Kiwachu Tumne, Hatami, Kovan, Shimbakiwachimata, Nevada, Tobachatovache. Titan, Tame Tombani Sobata, then come the Titan, come the Tabatavache, Ranchi Butabatova, Mayimba, Simja Shanda, all the Trinshire, Paman, de la Sobata, someone Pantotum get to join a Taban go to Gedi, Gurkusha, Yundekunde. Langdor Gene, Tamja Shengi, and Dekunde, Sambuta, Shiniga Tarsimba, or to the consultant and Jura Chavinism. Titun Dalia, Chunji, the Sumbanashi, shoot to the Teva Samba Kumbachi, Kumu set and the Samba shoes, or
So here, the Dharma is something that brings us happiness in this life and benefit in the long term. We talk about the Dharma as being the source of happiness and benefit for many beings and many lifetimes. If we abandon like a non-virtuous actions and engage in positive virtuous actions, we are going to have a better relationship with our family and then our neighbors and then our city and society and so forth. That's really the source of benefit and happiness in society. And there are times when we encounter difficulties and we need to be able to give rise to the kind of patience that is able to bear with, to take on the sort of sufferings that we are going to encounter. There are going to be those sorts of inauspicious things that we encounter. We're going to have good things happen too. But here, if we are able to really understand the Dharma properly and put it into practice in our lives, this is something where we will have better relationships with those around us. We will be happier in the here and now. If we're not going around harming others, it's much less likely they're going to want to harm us. But when those things that are sort of of not how we would like or inauspicious come about, we need to recognize that, well, this is the nature of samsara. This is something that is temporary. It will pass. I don't need to get upset about it, because when we are unhappy, when we get distressed, when we get upset, we tend to spread that to others. That is sort of has this ripple effect. If instead we can focus on abandoning harm towards others, trying to bear with those kinds of difficulties that we encounter, and really sincerely apply ourselves to taking up the kind of beneficial actions towards others, then we are going to really ensure good for ourselves here and now, as well as in the future. So it is up to us to accumulate that kind of merit. Like, our future is in our hands right now. As the Buddha has said, you are your protector. I mean, the Buddha is the teacher of this, but it is the Dharma that is the actual protection. Our practice of abandoning the 10 non-virtues, engaging in the 10 virtues, that is the Dharma that is going to protect us, that is going to ensure, at the very least, that we gain a good rebirth as a human or a god, which is sort of the aim of the being of small capacity. And at the middling scope, we think, well, wherever we are born, whether it is as a human or a god, we are still not outside of this cycle of uncontrollably taking rebirth, casting off and taking up the aggregates. And really, all of our various afflictions, our desire and attachment and anger and pride and jealousy and competitiveness, all of those trace back to this sense of I. And then we have a strong sense of mine. And it really is grasping at that I that is the root of all of the other afflictions, all of the other sorts of problems that we create in our mind. And it's like we have this sense of an I that's like right there. It's sort of like in the pit of our stomach or something. But we can't find something that we can point to that really is that I. We might have this feeling like, well, it's somewhere separate apart from my body or my aggregates. It's kind of like in control of those. Well, how could you posit a person outside of the physical form? Otherwise, that person wouldn't be human, right? There's no way for there to be something entirely separate and apart. And so at the point of the being of middling capacity, they think, I want to get rid of all of these afflictions. I want to get rid of the root of these afflictions and attain liberation from this cycle of uncontrolled rebirth. And then you get to the being of middling scope and you think, well, it's not just me who is in this situation in samsara, but all of these beings, my kind mothers and fathers, all of those who have acted in this way. And so for their sake, I want to be able to become a Buddha, a being who has eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities, has the ability to teach completely the points of what are to be adopted and abandoned. If I had that ability, I could really be of benefit to other sentient beings. So striving in that way, we should set our motivation for listening to these teachings on the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, thinking I'm going to, as much as I am able to, try to understand these teachings on selflessness, on emptiness, and implement them in order to become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings.
소리겠지, tragi지, tragi지, 라이지, 레시지. 대소야 사무탄에 되게 아니 쉐바를 수토 되었다는 사무담만 붙게지는 바치도 알아, 개도 알아. 미리 소리지 통. 아니 되야 통이야 미리 쉐바지 어디야 보도 되네 지지도 때 사무만 붙어도 알아. 가르치 깨져지 저 다디지레서 말을 사무관 같은 거야. 대소를 때네. 아니 쉐바도야 개도 알아. 콘도에 요거래, 나게 요거래, 차도에 요거래. 계획 사무와 연구를 매개와 연구를 강가 대소했던 이야기하거라. 근데 속이 깨치해서 미리 도야게 가도도 입도 졸라. 남버시바 깨시 남시바 담만다 야 개도로 채버스 개도서라. 속이 깨치 따기 유튜브도 와. 다 유튜브도 차야로 온부도 열라. 가도도 입도 좀 미리 온부를 사오라. 명함 사오라. 미리 온부 미리 깨치서 내라 미리 온부. 야 다도 좀 나와요, 뭐. 대체 아주 컴퓨터에다 투자시다 할래 시그리스 삼비와 아주 컴퓨터에 나와지 세대도 도와지 미리 도와지 지리지 티나지 강가 세버 통고도 가시 패스버 통고를 가시 또 셀마스 통고라. 다다시 암조 되게 지타로 지고에도 가시 암조 해서 거고 말아. 네. 대로를 잘해서 뭐 대조나 미개원부 나원부 지원부 레교원부 이교원부시 이교원부스에 sem남주 이기시바스라 미기시바다 이기시바스라 원부시바스라 대조라 미시나시 지시르시도 원부시바 원부 숙제발 때는 길을 와라 미개원부도 수로와 나원부 내원부 지원부 레교원부도 수로와 대회 때는 길이 해서 아니 가서 원부 숙제발 때는 길고도 그라 원부 원시스 거래. 이시서의 처를 때는 이기셔봐 줘라. 너무레스 다한테도 이시래. 미게 통교 말아 암주 거기 말게 하고 말아. 생리성한테 이시래. 남주 상을 만서와 다한테 이기셔봐 삼단 거래. 어디리시 미게 지도네 생리성을 다한테가 막뭐 야본도 두분도 지리 공도생 아직 강가요 거라. 대소리 때네. 미견들의 기치 투체 원부들의 미리 기치 나의 기치 내 기치 레기 기치 투체 또 원부들의 이제 원부 기초 잘 사게 될래 내가 나와 자원 요하시라 텔레폰에 시바기라 참 시바 넘버 시바기라 이 원부 남시시라 미리 넘버 시바 나가 넘버 시바 내 넘버 시바 넘버 시바 이게 넘버 시바시라 남시 투디 기겨라 유튜브에 원부투에 유튜브도 원부투를 수차 너 원부투가 넘버십밖에 티티르샤서 하공게 넘버십이 돌아다니 초화되기가 와라 유튜브 바로도 저 소소르다선 팬배치기 시바들 초르스나 초화되와 소소르다선 내배치기 유튜브 초르스나 초화동에 캐나다와 타이머케는도 삼성의 초화께서는 초아파 마스티기도 와. 어떤 티셔츠 와라. 티셔츠 다는 이 당한분이 퇴고 와라 주다. 비게 때리도 매나 가지고 엄불 수파되나 마찬나 싫어지어 말아. 비단 뒤 엄불 퇴고다. 엄불 퇴고 때문에 아니 쉐바디 깨고도 와. 미리 쉐바 끼그라. 어디에 지단 퇴고 와래. 미다 수니디 퇴고래. 저는 미리 넘버 쉐바디 깨고 그래. 그랬더니 초화될 때와다 동해 연구라. 그랬더니 공도다 타도 갈가리나 신다 강가 연구라. 어디 시에가라. 디시도 지다가도 미다 원부 태바요래 태바서라. 넘버 쉐바데 미다 원부다 태는 남시디 깨고래. 뒤태바 남시디 서서는 초화되와 동해 연구를 그랬더니 삼로담만다고 레케와 담미게와 달루마데 가르사나사 야니 상마데 연구라 삼다 연구라. 어딜 약간 간다 가르치는 시에서는 엄마 두다마들 카츠나 왜 두다마 치료받아 연발해 자가리를 치료를 tun다도 참에 망부셔 그래 참에 다 참에서 알아볼 때는 참에서 참에 망부셔야 거든 남바상에 발리 참에 카츠를 시에가래 너도 받은 치료 마시 두다 카츠를 대소리 두자도 참에 열어서 그래 뒤도서 전부도 총성방에 열어 전부에 또도 찍을 바탕고 어떤 총총다 추다메다 용다 담메다 신다시 다들 뭐로 치시 또따로 치시나 들만 총총다 들만 못 쳐도야라 뒤에 간가 쳐도야를 루루치 대원데 뒤에 치치는 자야 말으시거라 동대 열어서 건조 가가 밥도 열어시고 뒤에 참에 kelling 게 저. 뒤에 장에 고시 깨주면 게 총총총총데 고시 장은 깨주면 게 뒤에 열어시고라 뒤나라는 뒤에까지 리저브를 뒤에 총주치도 많이 찍어야 그래서 그래. 총주도 야야 샤초를 좀 넣어주지. 뒤샤초도 수지야 샤초는 그 뒤에 진짜들을 그 야야 땡고 맹게지 요요 말어 지다. 그도 뭐 전부 엄마도 잖아.但工作定的那都是的，但是国学上的教育那个也那个是对是有过的是全面对。이 공부에 뒤에 또 처음에 전부 차고요. 그래서 또 공부 지금 돼야 말해서 그래. 땅바 열어서 나도 내 뒤만 보여라. 그래서 그런 데 배기도 집어래요. 말 배를 땅바도 열어서 그래. 가시 투자해서 되어 배투요 말에 다니고요. 어때서 그래. 이 엄마가 전에 최남 랑을내요나. 최삼아 차제에서 그래. 차제. 그 가시 주요를 막 그러고 가시 주면은 그 추려를 지고래. 가사에는 풍부하게 구우다. 근데 그 강바리 중에 마음을 쉬어서 구우다. 그때 마음을 쉬어서 구우다. 차 가시면 게 차세지 마도 참여요 말해서 거라. 나 건조 드림 참여 하는 게 지금 참여 마음을 쉬어 그래. 참여. 제가 드림 참여해서 저 참여해서 얘다 땡으로 찍어요 말고 뒤에 있어 거라. 나 그걸 내 드림 도스네 배도 말해서 거라. 배도스네 찍어도 거라. 고쳐놔서. 근데 저 드린 참여 총수도 있었더라. 내가 전 도서나. 근데 도서나 내 토를 내려 말아. 또 참여에는 내 팀도 그래. 내려래 그래. 그 말에는 도스에서 안 참여를 도와. 내 차지도 와. 세배자. 땅을 태워 차지도 와. 내 태워서 내 차지. 뒤 두기 거서나 차투도 와서 거라. 그 뒤에 두기 땡도 와서 내 태어도 내 태어 말에 내 태어도 내 태어 말에 착하셔도 참여는 말에 참여는 배치되는 그래서 오라 참여는 들어 참여는 처리돼요 말에 뜻이오라 어떻게 가서라 미다 유니 태일에 태말에서 엄마가 라문에 두개 주지 태라이나 라문에 두개 주지 태라이나 그 안에 배 참여 요구하래 차다 째라이나 차세에서 오라 땡에 따버리고 땡들이 거래 차다 째버리나 차다 차카시 여버시 딜바로 따버리나 땡준데 버리 좋아시거라 카시시 소도마도 구투해가 말해 근데 참여 왜나 딱 처음 말해 그런 당장에 도와라 내 라면에 두바 더 담배로 라시 두바시도 여두가라 뒤에는 되는 대체가 시거라 미다 원부터를 위해서나 딱 그런 등이 버려 두다 참여가 와서라 참여도 되게 태우는 찌르는으로 와서거라. 저랑 참여해 봐서 참여도 찌르는으로. 찌르는 안에 태서 채들로 채바보다 태게 이미 구하러 와서 이미 도와서거라. 어딘데 저랬어 마시거라. 저장 그 차체에나 라면에 두바 연구요 말해. 라면에 두바, 랑신지 두바, 랑도 모여 두바, 술도 두바, 딱소도 두바, 채소도 두바, 대조 강아지 버려. 담바두가 나라서 남준남비사 그런 면에 지금 주 문제제로 라면에 수직 두병에서 남겨라 어디 나오는 시와 말해서 어디쯤에 저거라 쉬어야 돼 라면 차제마도 참여요 말에 참여요나니 담바두가 돼서 뒤도 모두 시샤제 뒤바로 뒤에 참여 장장요라 어디 지리질 두래 두 말에 그런 태요 말해서 그래 최선의 찌르는 거라. 그러. 태에는 이 요구르마도 제요 말와시거라. 태에는 배투베이나 배투베이나 보통 배나니 그 찌르는 거라. 어떤 게 그러나 이 동안부터 남시선 태라도 샤투 말해서 내 남바시로 깨투 말해서 기만에 이를 레베레베기 말해서 기만에 초아깨투 말해서 어디를 초아대와기에나 소아대와도 정신지기나 국가들이나 대외주도 상수나 대외장계 오래 뒤집으면 도와서 거라. 땡진 대본 중에서 그 유치가 있나야 소의 유치가 있나 참상을 대화지 그래 참상 동해지기도 하시고라 랑신기 소유는 대화 주되게 대화 경쟁게 우리 거기 있나 뒤에는 미치를 그 남주 칼라도 가지고 신부서 가보지기나 그 부더시 남미를 지켜를 좀 도처나 그때 남주나시 소화 대화지 말해 동해 소리가 때 먹어 강바로시 남주 축구시를 째가 개버렸지 남주는 것이다 제 로시를 딱걸로 두부를 좀 쉬우치지 두어지 야시도에나 질렀자를 주로는 시선에 고란테 돈데 동해지를 걸 다들 간 것이 자서 주마서 동해지라 자꾸 시집이 대교환지기도 하시 동해교환지기도 하시 뒤선자 돈데 차고 어떤 일 따다를 개발하고 그래서라 사실은 때는 땡지 델니는 봤다네 대화 될 때는 대화기 동해기 된데 샤고로 마다 이 코로나에 주 나한테 주서 라면에 시유나네 딱 봤던 유로 매버 대화도 대화 주도 되나 따버리 대화 깨버려 동해 주도 되나 따버리 동해 깨버렸어 어떤데서도 저 잡아줘라 시에도 가르쳐서 섬다다 하고는 내려마도 뭐 단지 스티스는 거야
So here, just to do a little bit of review of where we are. Here, we had left off at verse 97, which is dealing with the mindfulness of feelings, and the mindfulness of body occurred before that. And so now we're on to the mindfulness of feelings. Now here, this deals with, again, the way that we give rise to feeling through the kind of contact that happens between the various objects, our sense powers, and then our sense consciousnesses, or our consciousnesses, that includes the mental. So we have these 6 objects. We have forms, sounds, smells, taste, touch, like objects of touch, and phenomena. So although phenomena generally encompasses all of those, in this context, we're talking about objects of mind. So here it is on this basis of, and in the case of our sense powers, the 5 sense powers are physical, are a subtle kind of physical form. And it is then independence upon having the object condition of, again, a sound, a form, sound, smell, and so forth, meeting with the proper kind of sense power, which then gives rise to sense consciousnesses. So, sorry, when it comes to then the kind of basis, again, we have these kind of physical bases for our sense powers, and then the mental sense basis. And that word that's like basis really gives the sense of it's what allows for proliferation, right? So when we then have an object meet our sense power and we give rise to a consciousness of that, then we have all kinds of different thoughts and so forth that arise in dependence upon those meeting. And so we have all kinds of various thoughts like, oh, this is good, this is bad, this is pleasant, this is unpleasant. So again, when we have a kind of object condition, and then we have it meet with a physical sense power or our mental sense power that gives rise to the various 6 consciousnesses. So again, that makes these 18, the objects, the sense powers, and the consciousnesses that arise. And based upon the arising of that consciousness, we have feelings. So there has to be some kind of contact between the sense power and the object in order to have a feeling. Like when we think, oh, this will be of help to me, and we want to get that, or this will be of harm to me, and then we want to get it away from us, and so forth. So in general, if we are to give rise to a feeling, we'd have to say that a particular consciousness, or really the sense power, comes into contact with an object that in turn gives rise to that kind of consciousness. And so here, when it comes to how this comes about, like in general, we would say, yes, they do meet. But it it isn't in the way of having kind of like an inherent or intrinsic sort of existence. So this is where we get into the idea of particularly like things that are partless. And many Hindu schools would assert phenomena that are partless, like partless particles or partless moments of time. And there are some Buddhist schools as well. And so they would say, okay, if we have something that's like this earth, right, that's a solid, a whole, we could get it smaller and smaller and smaller. We get into the smallest piece, and that piece should no longer be divisible. It should be something that is partless, like you can no longer cut it into smaller sections. But if that were the case, that you were to assert some sort of particle or atom that were partless, then how could they possibly aggregate? How could they connect with each other? If you don't have like a front, a back, an up, a down, various sides, where is it that those particles would actually meet to be able to aggregate? So some people would say that there's actually like a little bit of space that remains between them, but still, spatially speaking, they have to have dimensional components that would come into contact with each other. So how could they assert that? If you try to say that there are partless particles, that would imply that they can no longer have any sort of directional surfaces, and thereby we would have to say that nothing could grow larger. Like if you're trying to assert two partless particles come into contact, they would basically dissolve into one another or just sort of collapse into one another. And so if we are to ask, well then, is it the case, like in this text we have been looking at, is there, if they are partless, how is contact between them ever supposed to be justified? How could we talk about contact between an object and a sense space with these kinds of partless particles, given the logical flaws of asserting such partless particles? So here, again, it's the case of like we can talk about them being dependently designated, that there is in dependence upon a particular object condition, our sense power meeting with that particular object condition, we give rise to a kind of consciousness and on that basis feeling. But there aren't these sorts of like really ultimately truly existent partless particles. So often we talk about this in terms of like being ultimately existent, being able to bear scrutiny, being able to bear analysis. If it were the case, again, that there were such partless particles, it would not be possible for there to be contact. So here, again, when it comes to the understanding of the way in which our sense objects and our mental sense power come into contact with various objects, it is merely dependently designated. Something seems like it's beneficial to us and we give rise to a feeling of it being pleasurable, or something sort of is adverse to us and so we give rise to a feeling of it being unpleasurable, something that we dislike. And so here, if it were the case that somehow the objects themselves had that kind of real true existence, both in the sense of those particles being really truly existent, but also having that kind of true existence as an object, if they were objectively existent as, say, the object of pleasure or the object of pain, then whatever the circumstances, we would have to feel pleasure in that object. But we can see, for example, like someone who is overcome by grief, even if you give them lots of nice, beautiful things, they don't experience pleasure from that. It isn't as though that somehow inheres in the object, and whenever you meet that, it is going to create pleasure. Or someone like a king who's in really good circumstances, even though he might get sort of reprimanded or have something bad happen, because of his sort of general status and circumstances, he might not see that as being some kind of suffering. So on a single basis, we can designate it differently. It depends upon the mental designation that is happening, not just some sort of existence in and of itself from the side of the object. So here, in terms of talking about this kind of as we have been in this section of the text, the mindfulness of feelings, here it is refuting the idea that there could be some kind of inherently, really, truly existent feeling. And when, as these lower schools do, they assert that there is some kind of inherent existence in the object, these are the sorts of logical fallacies that are being pointed out, that if there were partless particles, there could be no contact, right? If you don't have directional spheres, directional spaces, you can't meet with something else in such a way as to aggregate into larger shapes and forms and so forth. And if it is the case that, objects out there exist inherently as an object of pleasure or an object of pain, then they would have to always give us pleasure or always give us pain. But we can see that our circumstances, the way that we mentally label them, actually has an effect that changes based upon our sort of mental labeling. So it isn't as though phenomena have that kind of existence in and of themselves from their own side, independent of this kind of process of mental designation. So again, while some would assert that there's like a really truly existent thing out there, an object, and there's a truly existent sense power, and it is through the contact of those, the meeting of those, that we then give rise to various consciousnesses and feelings and so forth, we can see the kind of logical fallacies that would incur if you were to try to assert the existence of such partless particles. There can't be contact in that kind of situation. And so too, when it comes to objects, although they seem to have that kind of existence in and of themselves, in their own right, able to like bear scrutiny or analysis, where you could point to them and say, this is it, it's right there. That is not the case. If it were the case that they had such existence in that way, then whoever perceived them, if it was, they would have to have the same feeling arise. And we can see that that is clearly not the case, that on a single basis, it depends upon how we designate from our own side. So here, this is really a refutation by the Madhyamikas of this idea that there could be some kind of inherently existent contact based upon inherently existent particles aggregating and so forth.
Cho nên khi mà mắt mà thấy được đối tượng, khi nó tiếp xúc thì nó tiếp xúc như thế nào? Cho nên đây là phân tích là nếu mà nói là nó không có phương phần thì nó tự có, nó thực có, nó tồn tại một cách độc lập, nó là thắng nghĩa đế vân vân. Cho nên nếu như vậy thì nó sẽ hoàn toàn không hợp lý, thì sẽ không có sự tiếp xúc, tại vì nó là một, nhưng cái hạt nó không có tiếp xúc. Nếu tiếp xúc thì nó phải có một cái cạnh này, hạt này tiếp xúc hạt kia thì nó sẽ dính vào cạnh bên trái, nó không dính vào cạnh bên phải hay không dính vào những cạnh khác. Nhưng mà nó không có phương phần, nó không có phần nào, không có phương đông tây nam bắc, thì nó sẽ, hạt này nó đụng tới hạt kia thì nó sẽ lọt vào trong nhau, nó trở thành một mất, thì nó sẽ không bao giờ lớn hơn được. Thì làm sao gọi là tiếp xúc? Tiếp xúc thì cần có hai, nhưng mà nó không có phương phần thì làm sao nó có hai? Cho nên đó để phân tích rằng những cái gì để chia sẻ, để nói rằng cái nói mà không có phương phần là không hợp lý, không có một hạt không thể phân chia cũng không phù hợp. Cho nên là tất cả những cái gì nó trình hiện, mình thấy có một khối giống như rắn chắc như vậy, nhưng thực ra nó không tồn tại như là nó trình hiện. Cho nên khi mà các căn tiếp xúc với trần, với sinh ra một nhận thức, thì nếu như mà nó không có phương phần thì nó không có tiếp xúc, nó không tiếp xúc thì làm sao nói là căn tiếp xúc với trần để sinh ra một cái nhận thức. Không có nhận thức thì sẽ không có một cái sự cảm thọ. Cho nên không có một sự cảm thọ thì sẽ không bao giờ có một cái hạt nào mà không có phương phần. Cũng như vậy sẽ không phù hợp. Nếu như cũng một cái điều kiện như vậy, nhưng mà có khi chúng ta tiếp xúc điều kiện đó thì mình sẽ cảm thấy rất là vui. Nhưng cũng có một điều như vậy, khi chúng ta tiếp xúc điều kiện đó thì chúng ta cảm thấy khổ. Tại vì ví dụ như giống như một người đó thường thích món ăn đó rất là ngon đối với họ, nhưng mà trong khi gia đình gặp chuyện rắc rối hay là có người mất thì cũng muốn ăn đó, nhưng người ta không cảm được cái vị ngon. Đấy, cho nên là tùy theo cái cảm xúc của người đó để tiếp nhận với đối tượng. Nếu đối tượng đó nó thật có thì lúc nào nó cũng phải giống như vậy, cùng một cảm xúc, cùng một cảm nhận. Nhưng mà nó không phải như vậy, nó thay đổi theo cái cảm xúc của người cảm nhận. Cho nên để nói rằng là cái đối tượng đó nó không thực có, nó tùy theo nó sự gán đặt mà cho nó là khổ hay là vui. Ví dụ một người đó sống một ngôi nhà rất là đẹp, họ rất là sung sướng trong ngôi nhà đó, nhưng mà có khi trong lòng họ bấn loạn, bất an, hay là trong nhà có người bệnh, có người chết, thì họ vẫn sống trong ngôi nhà đó nhưng tâm hồn họ không có cảm nhận được niềm vui. Cho nên cũng một cái nền tảng, một cơ sở như vậy, nhưng có khi nó mang lại một cảm giác vui cho họ, có khi nó mang lại một cảm giác buồn. Điều đó để chứng minh rằng là nó không có một đối tượng tồn tại một cách độc lập, thì nó phụ thuộc vào cái điều kiện của tâm thức mình cảm nhận đối tượng đó. Chứ đối tượng đó nó không thực có, nó không thực thể. Mà cái khổ, cái cảm thọ, khổ vui nó cũng tùy theo lúc, mà tùy theo cái tình huống nữa. Cho nên để chứng minh rằng cái đối tượng đó nó không thực có. Cho nên nếu như nó thực có thì đối tượng đó lúc nào cũng mang lại an lạc, thì lúc nào mình gặp nó mình cũng cảm thấy vui. Nếu như đối tượng đó nó thật là có thì cái đó là nó lúc nào cũng mang lại cảm giác bất an, khổ, thì lúc nào cũng phải khổ. Nhưng mà đối tượng nó không có thực có, nó chỉ là nó chỉ là do một cái phối hợp, do phụ thuộc điều kiện mà nó hình thành, cho nên nó không có phải là thực thể.
Nam Shiva Chaba Shinji Tuba Kawas. Number Shiva make number Shiva te any Miwada Su Sum the Traguyara. Miwada Su the Traguyara. The Traba to Yora, the Ramshinji Tuba Traba Yomares or Umabatan Yosena. Ramshinji Tuba Traba Shiromare. Then a dog with Traba. Then a dog with some Traba Shiromado. Ramshinji Traba Yomar, Ramune. Traba di sin zu se yu stena kende shi wa mare se rang shin ji traba yu mare tene ta be traba yu de se ti se wa da tanda o nam shi la traba rang shin ji tu ba ka ba tene ta be traba yu de rang shin ji tu be traba yu mare se wa ti ka re se nam shi lu me pa la ne traba ma yin number she ba te ya su ji lu yu mara Suchen li yamara, Shevaria su yamara, Tutu Chuba Marwa, Sopo Dajini Tutu Chubarwa, Suchenwa. The number Shevaria, number Sheba Suchemare, Tutu Chuba Mare, this was the Lumebas, Lumebas. Namshi Lumi Balane, Cheba Mines, Lumena, one with the Tag Yamara, could tell you need Suchen in each Tayara. That is. Then I talk about some travel the shots over there. I wanted to be travel, the condition travelers, Lumen Nam City, Pajo the Trail or Mara, two or Mara, Sigora. A travel my years. And so long, we will make it, one number chambers. So what do I do? Choba Rabba de la Sigora. So was it here, Ramshinji to the Choba, Travel Share Maris, Chidap to Baracotagina. There are travel on Shinji to way on Maris. One number seven, Ngaria, Chopa, Luigi, Chopa, charging the Ranshinji to Bayana, and then like that they combated the Resident Mara, Teleshando, Luigi Yala Chance, Loss, Lord, was there, Omaro, or the Dechani, Chevachan, the Rapa Hinaya, Ranshinji to the Travel Omar, Chida, Rabola Treva, the Yodwa, Labada Lava Treva, you good at the Yanaya. Ranshinji to be travel your mother, so long over major day, Ranshinji to be over major city, Nami number Chevasha, Ranshinji to be over Mabate, Ranshinji to be travel Mabate, Narakondo, Lu Sobate, Ranshinji to be your mother, so Lu Tambanya Sheva of Shesa, all the Shesa are inserted at this.
So here, picking up from verse 96, where it says here that consciousness is immaterial, and so one cannot speak of contact with it. A combination, too, has no reality, just as we have previously shown. So here, when it comes to contact, there is no sort of inherent meeting. There is no meeting that is like objective or from its own side, but is rather something that is dependently designated. So when we think about this, like when the mind, we would all say that the mind perceives objects, but it's not as though consciousness, which lacks materiality, is able to be in contact, in physical contact with a form. So because consciousness is immaterial, it isn't suitable as a form. It's not possible to have any sort of like inherently existent, truly existent meeting. Now, we talk about their coming together, as it says, like a combination. There is the coming together of various objects in our sense consciousness, but that has no real inherent existence to it. So, nor is there sort of when it comes to the contact involved, like the sort of atoms involved in the conjunction or the coming together of the sense organ and the object, we can say that there is no inherently existent contact, since they are not real. So here we can talk again about their meeting in a sort of dependently designated way. But when we try to look for, well, where is that? Again, to be able to sort of point to it, like we can talk about, well, the hand contacts my other hand, right? There's contact there. But when you try to investigate and analyze and point to, well, what actually is the hand? Where is that? And try to find that thing, there is nothing that we can point to. There's nothing real or inherent there, but rather even the hand touching another hand is something that is dependently designated. So here we can talk about there being contact. Our consciousnesses are able to take various objects, but it's not as though there is this kind of actual meeting, really truly existent meeting. And nor too is the sort of coming together itself something that is inherently existent. We can talk about it as something that is dependently designated. And here where it says, just as we have previously shown, that was regarding the body.
대충 트래블에 쇼에 레버런 신기 마투바스다 이래다 원보다 남시 숨 채네 에네 레바되는 거라 시간에서 말하지 두번 레바스비바 레바를 때네 시바데다 대충 트래블 때네 유레 레네 에네 소아테도 연구하라 근데 레버런 신기 두고요 말이스 대충 트래블 이왕 남시 소부도 트래블 때네 에네 레바용 그래서 레베겐게니 초아용 그래서 그 대충 트래블의 라시게 매나 레바 라시게 두바도 용고 말에 그 라시게 두바 매바 쳐베치야 레부 라시게 두바 템바시가 요 말에 티시도 대다 레바 왜 매나서 소아 간에 중앙들 레바 라시 요한 남시 소 트래블 때네 레바 라시게 두바 껴 매나서 거라 에네 소아 간에 저 레베겐기 초아용 거라 어때도 생각 템베치게 야고도 야고면도 samsati choa de yongora choa kan le jong ar juru se ne de chi tan do ye ne choa rang shi ji to chi me ro ye na choa ton da le ne ka le kem ne be su chen ne ka le ma bu ja wi ro so so te wa yong ya ton da le ya te ye cha chen de choa ya ton da le ka le ma bu ja ro te wa rang shi ji to me na ne kar chen ka le kya wi ro se na so ra chi tan do yin se 강게 강라 내가리 요새 라신기 쪽에 쓰게 동해대에 저는 시알을 내야다 대화되게 시알을 팬버트에 되게 말했어도 말시에 봤다리 요한 남시 숨 태바 라신기 매봤다 더나서라 레베 라신기 쪽에 여바 미세 레베 라신기 쪽에 매나는 초 대바도바데 그 강래 쪽에 레베 경기 초용 거라 레바 라시기 투바 매나니 초아데 요구 말했대 초에 줄을 랩바거라 랩바진지 초하시거라 초와 덴바주바 주강내 중앙 주대 그 준바 이용한 남시 좀 채바다 랩바디 준바를 소 덴바주바 마로 되면은 이 덴바주바 초하지 거야 여러 초와 그 준바 인바리아 제부 준바 시키는 마도 그 준바는 제부 덴바주바시 랑신지 주바시 그 말을 시거라 그 준바에 제부 덴바주바 끼베 누가 매르치래 소와 랑신지 주바 매나 대도도 매바 지도도 소와 랑신지 주바 소와지 매나 랑웨다 주바 소와 데레스 주토서치 매나 소와라 가르토다 칼레 잡고라스나 지델레 칼레 자 사마데 테레토도 다 강에서 동네 매와다 테레토도 칼레 잡고라 대원 중공시도 대도도 냐 매바도 지도도 지도도 이제 단단도 왔으나 소와 동네랑 신지 주바 뻥베토도 인도시나데 소와 동네랑 신지 주바요레 대화랑 신지 주바요레 대선자 동네랑 신지 주바 때문에 해야시도래서 나서와라 어때 동네랑 신지 주바요 말에 대화랑 신지 주바요 말에 대말요 말에서 오래 메테데서 유간에 가사 간라 내가 주데 소와 동네랑 신지 주바 내베서 랑신지 주바 내지 지나네 지실네 거라 랑신 주바 지나 거리요 말에 지된데나 동네 치수게 때와 잠시 얘기해서 지된데나 동네 치수게 때와 잠시 얘기 동네랑 잡아 내가 마도 해봐서 이 마다 마도 안 되나라 동네랑 잡아 얘가 다른 게 매마 동네도 문에 단에 잡아서 하고 챙기 들어서요 마단데 동네도 동네 문에서 대샤서 그래 가래서 동네 주디까지 얘가도 얘가 된들고 나나가서 되기라 동네 도와서 대화도 강요를 지어서 동네 지어서 기타 시에도 되는데 대회 쳐가지고도 오세요 대화로 맞춰 그래서 지가가 고세 그 내면에 소보다 차와다 차와라 소보 대화 마무리하라 어때서 참아대 대화대 동네 지원에 강요 지원에 기타에 초로도 약간들이야 아니 대화세기도 맞도 대화로 말이지래 셔서라 소소 삼로게 라고 조소서 대화로 맞지를 맞도 대화 몰라도 나 말해서 또 잠시에도 내가 미지 카드에나 카드 쇼 카드에나 거기에 조사를 처벌을 해서 지금 꼴렸으나 아니 그때 대화 소리로 와 내가 카드에 동네에 맞춰서 초도도 그 대화 소리를 해서 카드에 동네에 간거 조사서는 그 제일 고쳐서래 시험 고쳐도 또 동네 야신다지 고쳐서로 근데 그 다리 대화대 사와대 그래서 대화문에 있는 단다 그저 내나고 대화도 해요 그래 뒤로 말 되게 동네디 켜고도 해서 켜고 조사서는 야 동네 깨고도 자 초와 대화서 되고 동네디 중에 동네디 초도 약간들이야 대화를 삼수수 넘기도 오시거라 칼라레서 내 담부터 싶으시 또 되려나 딱 칼라 도와서 싶으시 또 삼사기라 세세세세 마무서 뭐뭐 싶으시 또 삼베리나 또르질라니 교배교도 지기라 그 교도다 사야도 뭐뭐 찍베레 칼라 찍베레 티사리와라 이나 담부터 또다 쳐서 코페 신부와라 근데 마신부 세버루질 마보세네 우수세네 동행께 돌려두라 어때인데 지금은 나라서 대화세도 강가 강에 주변에 강에 된 내가 쳐서 왔다가 총소를 삼제 소소 대화 발론 받samre 샤시 대화문에를 만들어서 그래 동행문에를 샤시 랑찬다 동행문에를 샤 랑문에 두게 좀 말다 동행 랑찬문에를 샤 가르스네 동행 좀 걸어진다고나 야 미치 니리나 쉬고나 가서 쉬시바도 동행한테 이름하도 버릇이 되게 소화해야지 말아 어때도 지대면 저 대화되었어야 돼. 강해지에 티마시에 거들에 따라고 총소 삼겨라. 대외 주다가랑 이나 그때 제대로 버릇이 순제 동에게 온 거라. 어떻게 개만 도세. 지대배 코에 대화도 강가. 동에도 동에문에 레샤스. 대화도 대화로 마찬가지예요. 어때서 되지 않아요. 뭐 된대죠.
So
그냥 빼고도 놀러 먹고 제신 더 어디서
here,
Chua dewa de tende re shaas wara. Tunga ji yo nani jima di chung duwa ka dewa re shaas. Chua dewa de. Tunga di ko dunga rang re shaas. Ngombo rang te re ma ta shiki. Ngombo de sebe le ne don juye ke yo ma ra. Wo tina shi re shaas. Ya tinte rang.
so then turning to verse 97, it says, thus, if contact is not truly existent, how is feeling possible? What is the point of exertion? Who could be harmed by what? So here, in dependence, again, on the object, the sense power, and the consciousness coming together, that's what gives rise to feeling, but not in an inherently existent way. Rather, there is no really, truly existent sort of feeling, but yet we pursue our feelings like, oh, this is good, this is not good. All of our efforts are really to get those kinds of things, to get good feelings, to get something that is positive. But here, as it says, like, as was explained previously, from the coming together, there is, in a way that there isn't any inherent meeting between the three, the object, the sense power, and the consciousness. Since there is no inherently existent contact, then how, like, from what cause could there be an inherently or really truly existent feeling, like a real true feeling, from something that has a false cause, in this case, like not truly existent, then how could that give rise to something that is a truly existent result? So if we can't locate or identify contact, if we have to say that contact is not inherently existent, then how could it give rise to a kind of feeling that is inherently existent? But yet it is for the sake of those feelings that really all of our efforts are made. But then the question arises, why would we make so much effort towards something that isn't really truly existent? So here, if we say that, well, is it logical or right to make an effort to abandon inherently existent suffering? Well, no, there is like no inherently existent suffering feeling that is able to be of harm to a sentient being. And so here, in addition to this, recognizing that there is no feeling that exists from its own side, there is no inherently existent sort of happiness and suffering. These are all merely dependently designated. But here there is also an important distinction between, in this world, suffering is really, when we think about like what is happiness in this world, we think that there is like real true happiness, right? That we experience suffering, we experience happiness, but really happiness is such that we have a sort of inflated sense of that as it being pleasurable or happy, in the sense that it's really the case that happiness is just a diminishment of suffering that we are experiencing, and it's not something that is in and of itself actual happiness. So it's really rather stupid to take it in that way. Like, for example, if we're cold and so thereby we move into the sun, I mean, that at first feels like very pleasurable because we get rid of that suffering of cold, but soon we are going to be burnt by the sun. It's not going to be in the nature of pleasure. Really, it's just the reduction of the abject suffering that we were experiencing. blessing, or you think that some object is really truly happiness, like, oh, these delicious momos. If I were to keep eating these momos, that would give me just more and more and more happiness. Well, we know that that's not the case. If you eat enough of them, you're going to make yourself sick and be throwing up, and it's definitely no longer the source of pleasure. Here, it's not the case, though, that this goes for suffering. Like, if someone is hitting you on the face, it's not as though that suffering at some point transforms into happiness. But no, it's just going to stay like that. It's just going to be misery and suffering. And so here, it is the case that our happiness, or what we think of as being pleasure, is something that is really dependent or contingent upon the reduction of some kind of suffering feeling. So, like, in the way that we could posit something as being long and short, really, it is only in relation to something else that we can say, oh, this is long because that one is shorter, and so forth. Here, we can't say, so happiness is really just dependent upon a reduction of suffering. It's not something that has that kind of real, true existence, that it always is. Like, we could talk about blue and yellow. I mean, blue is blue whether it is next to something else or not, and yellow is yellow whether it is something next to something else or not. But our sort of long and short are something that is contingent. And so, too, our happiness is always contingent. It is something that's sort of an inflated feeling of happiness, when in reality, it's just a temporary reduction of our sort of abject suffering.
Vì cái khổ đau nó giảm thiểu xuống, nó nhẹ xuống một chút, cho mình cảm là nó lạc thôi. Cũng như vậy, cái sự đối đãi mà chúng ta có cảm thọ dễ chịu với khó chịu, không khổ và vui. Cũng như vậy, một cái vật chất giống như một cái khối gì đó, nó có cây dài, thì nó so với một cái ngắn thì nó là dài, nhưng so với cái dài hơn nó là ngắn. Cũng như vậy, tất cả cảm thọ lạc của chúng ta cũng vậy, nó đối đãi với cảm thọ khổ. Nó giảm bớt cảm thọ khổ một chút thì mình cảm thọ lạc. Nó đối đãi mà nó tồn tại thôi, chứ không có một cái cảm thọ lạc nào thực thể cả, không có thực sự của cảm thọ lạc. Cũng như vậy, màu xanh nó mở màu xanh, nó không thể chuyển đổi thành màu vàng. Cũng vậy, khổ đau là một cái việc tồn tại, là một cái việc có thực, nhưng mà cái cảm thọ lạc chỉ là một cái ảo giác, một cái cảm thọ giả.
Sao số à? Sao rồi bà? Sao số? Ôi dạ.
Yeah.
So we are out of time for today. We'll leave it there.
너무 아쉽다. 네. Ôi à, đi theo được. Đi ta chụp được một số cái.
Thưa quý vị, viên chưa nói tối mai mình sẽ có lớp làm pin đầu gối tới 9 giờ.
다들 가는 데가 다 되게 비싸. 됐어. 听到了是。 Ôi da, ôi da. Ôi da. Đi vào cái này.